Hello and welcome to Tom's Comic Curios, where you'll hear about comic books that you often don't hear about elsewhere. Today on the show, we're going to talk about a comic book which I consider to be one of the very best comic books I have ever read from the early 2000s. It's a book called Private Beach, and this is the trade paperback. So I looked online to see if there are any videos on this comic on YouTube, and I couldn't find a single one. So, I thought to myself, this comic is so good that somebody should be talking about it. So I'm talking about it now. Private Beach began as a miniseries back in the 1990s, the mid-1990s. And it was called Private Beach. You can see it at the top there. Fun and Perils in the Trudyverse. This is the first issue. It's a very long title, as you can see. I think one reason that the creator of this comic, David Hahn, wanted to have a long title is because the word Trudyverse would be easy to find, because nobody else was using that word, so it kind of set the comic book apart from other comic books. But this came out in January 1995, I believe. That's the cover date. It may have come out like a month earlier or so, but it's around that time. And it's about, this is a comic that's a little hard to explain. So actually, I'm going to read to you a description of it, the original miniseries, on atomicavenue.com. I have it in a notepad format here. So it says, this likable series is set around 20-something Trudy Honeyvan, and that's Trudy Honeyvan on the cover right here, and her circle of friends. Trudy is a smart and attractive brunette who never seems to get dates, mostly because she's considered a bit eccentric. This becomes understandable when we find out that Trudy was visited by aliens in her closet as a little girl. Over the years, the aliens have continued to contact her, warning that at some point in the future they will need her help. And you don't see these aliens either. Like, when you see the flashback to when she's a little girl and she sees the alien in her closet, it's in the dark, so you only see like the eyes. You don't really see what the alien looks like. That time comes as she is walking home after a party. So this now flash forwards like when she's in her 20s now. She's walking home from a party, and a voice in her head sends her on a ridiculous quest to find the visa fetish, which has nothing to do with fetishes, by the way. It's just this weird name of this object, this strange object. An article of some import which was currently in the hands of a man named Johnny Jones. Once she had the fetish, she would be able to find the alien's lost friend and get the aliens off her back once and for all. Of course, fulfilling this quest was to be anything but easy, especially when it came to explaining the whole enterprise to her friends. So that's right. So just in case you didn't get that, because it is kind of complicated, an alien comes to her in her closet when she's a little girl and says, someday we're going to need your help. So just realize that. And then I think there's actually a long period where she doesn't hear the voices. Like, she hears them on and off, but then there's a long period where they go away. But then when she's coming back from a party in her 20s, the voices start up again, and they say, this is the time. This is the time that we're going to need your help. They say you have to find this object called the visa fetish, and it's in the hands of a man named Johnny Jones. So, and you have to get that object, and somehow that's going to help us. Because it has to do with an alien who doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know he's an alien. He doesn't know he's on Earth. It's weird. It's really weird, but it's really interesting, and it's a really engaging story. Now, you'll see on the cover, it looks just like a beach scene. You think this might be just a California comic or something, like a beach comic, but that's not really what it is. You'll see in the back, you'll see a UFO, which is an indication that there's going to be some strange goings-ons in this comic. Now, the 3-issue miniseries was published by Antarctic Press, the original 3-issue miniseries. This is the 2nd issue. Now, Trudy's best friend is a girl named Sharona Kupke, and that's her there in the back. So Trudy Honeyvan is the protagonist. Sharona Kupke is her best friend. They have these cool names, you know, these characters. And Sharona has a twin sister named Siobhan. It's like Siobhan, which I had to look up how that's pronounced. So I believe it's pronounced Siobhan Kupke. That is her sister. Okay, and the 3 of them, they engage in these wry observations of humanity. Like they'll see people walking by, and they'll make comments on the way they're dressed or the way they look, and comments about their behavior. They make comments on popular culture. They make comments on everything. These witty kind of observations, and they're very engaging. A lot of times they're really funny too. And you can tell when you read the comic that the author has put, it would seem, his own opinions into the characters a lot of the time. And I just read an interview with him before I did this video to research, and he said that he did have a lot of those opinions at the time. He's kind of changed over time. He doesn't really, he's a different person, 20 years later or whatever, right? But at the time, yes, he did hold a lot of these opinions and put them through the characters and things like that. So this is to say that it's not just about this alien thing. Like, if you're thinking this is like a science fiction story about aliens and strange happenings, that's only a part of it, a small part of it. What I love about this comic book, this is the 3rd issue of the 3-issue miniseries. What you'll see here, by the way, is Trudy's dressed as Cleopatra, and her friend is dressed as a bear. Now, when you see a cover like this in a comic shop, you think, is that just a quirky comic book, just a weird comic book where the cover has nothing to do with the story? It's just some weird thing. But no, it does have something to do with the story. That's what I thought at first, though. Well, it does have something to do with the story. But I was going to say, what I love about the comic book is it's not, it's about real people having real conversations. I love comic books like that. I like things that are grounded in reality. Slice of life comics. People have compared the comic book to Reality Bites, if you remember that old Winona Ryder movie. I think it's better than that, though. They've compared it to Twin Peaks because, seemingly normal place they live in, but these weird, bizarre happenings occur. That's probably a better comparison. Love and Rockets, which doesn't have the fantastical stuff from what I understand. I've never read it. But Strangers in Paradise, fans of that might like this comic. But anyway, so the 3-issue miniseries was in 1995, right? Then it disappeared. The comic disappeared for 5-6 years. He didn't do anything else with the characters. It is explained, David Hahn explains in the editorial in the first reboot issue that he worked on a Bad Girl comic. Bad Girl comics were like a big deal in the 90s. It's not my type of thing, but there's a lot of stuff like that then, and like the superhero type image and Valiant stuff with big guys and stuff like that, all that, whatever. But anyway, he started working on a Bad Girl comic, and he left these characters behind, and he eventually went back to them, and he said, I don't know why I left these characters behind. These are great characters, and I should have done more with this. And he did a reboot of the series, and now we don't have the Fun and Perils in the Trudyverse on the cover because he figured that title was a bit too long, it was a bit too unwieldy, so he just called it Private Beach. This was the first issue of the reboot, and now it was published by Slave Labor Graphics. So that's Sharona and Trudy. on the cover there, and you see they're saying, we're not really having a whimsical romp on the beach. We're just faking it for this cover, which is funny. You know, it's funny. This is not a humor comic, but there's a lot of humor in the comic. I don't know what genre this comic would be. It's just an amazing genre, I guess. Oh, and I want to say that David Hahn's writing and his artwork improved tremendously from the 3-issue miniseries back in the mid-90s. Not that it was ever bad or anything. Here's some of the artwork from the 3-issue miniseries. But the artwork improved tremendously. The writing improved tremendously. So this story, the original story, is a fun little story. It's a cute little story. I do recommend it. But the later series, the reboot, is much better, though. Again, there's nothing wrong with this story. It's still a good story. And even he said the same thing. David Hahn said the same thing. So this one, now you look at the artwork now in this reboot series. At the very beginning of it, Trudy's a girl here in the 70s. It's a flashback sequence, and she sees a UFO. And then she kind of forgets about it and goes to watch Bionic Woman. Then we go to the present day, which was 2001, when this comic came out. Trudy is 25 years old, I believe, in this comic. And there she is with her best friend, Sharona. They're in a diner, and then they go to a comic shop. And she tells off the comic shop owner for being condescending towards his patrons. There's all these little random events that occur in this comic book that don't seem to be connected in any way. But, the genius. You know when you have a genius storyteller, it all comes together eventually. It's all connected. But you don't know where it's going. As a reader, you don't know what's going to happen next. But you're on the edge of your seat reading this. It goes back and forth between just mundane adventures. I wouldn't call them mundane, actually. Just what I mean is just normal adventures, right? Going to the comic store, going shopping, going to the beach or something like that. And the witty conversations that these characters have, the observations that they have and everything, which are just so much fun to read, to something bizarre happening, something strange happening out of the blue. And you're like, where did that come from? What a weird little thing that was. What a twist, you know? So they're driving along. They're going to the beach. Oh, man. Okay, so I just read the whole run of this comic book. Well, every issue I've got, which is the whole run, pretty much. But I'll explain that later on. And I just realized something, right? See, this is what is amazing about this comic. This is so amazing. Okay. So in the very first issue, you see this kid on a school bus looking out the window at Sharona and Trudy. Well, that kid shows up again around issue 7. And I didn't know who he was. I was like, I don't remember this kid. Like, what is that about? And it said something about this kid that likes looking out windows. And I didn't remember that at all until I just showed this to you right here. So again, it's like 7 issues later, the kid shows up again. That continuity is incredible. And everything just ties in, you know? If it's not obvious, I highly recommend this comic book. This is definitely, I only discovered this comic book a couple of years ago, but this is one of my favorite comic books that I've ever read. This is not, and I do a lot of weird comics on this channel, oddball comics like Charlie the Caveman and stuff like that, Oil Man, but this is just quality stuff. And there's not, like I said, I didn't see a single video on YouTube about this comic book. So that's their friend Junior they're talking to. He also makes a lot of witty observations. So they're on the beach, they're watching people go by, making observations about that. Oh, the expressions. David Hahn's expressions of his characters. See, now Trudy's just looking at different people. And each time she looks at somebody, She has a slightly different expression on her face, you see. And it says so much, like you don't even need dialogue there. You don't even need dialogue because he's so good at making these expressions on these characters. It's just amazing. And you see these two guys here, two men in black, right? And you start thinking, okay, alien encounters or whatever, that kind of thing. And you wonder, that's the first time you see them. It says, well, what does that mean, right? Oh, man. See, I could tell you more about the story here, but I feel like I shouldn't give too much away. Like the events, because I feel like you should seek this out for yourself, this comic, because it's that good. So I'm not going to tell you everything that happens. But anyway, this is just a look at the first issue. It's just look at that artwork. That is just unbelievable artwork. That is just beautiful artwork. So, okay, so that's the first issue. Second issue. I do want to tell you a bit, though, right? So you get you interested in it, like I have been. But this is the second issue. So I won't open this one up to show you since it's in plastic already. So there's the two guys. There's the two guys that were on the beach in the first issue. So in this issue, these two men approach her. And they say to her, would you like to work for us? We're with a club called Heaven's Rift. And she doesn't know what that is, and she's wary of it, right? And she's like, well, what's that all about? And they say, well, you don't have to do much at the club. It's a nightclub, because she thinks it's like a different sort of club, maybe like a religious club or something. And they say, no, it's a nightclub. And they're like, all you have to do is like be a hostess, basically. Show people around. If they say they want to visit the Golden Den, then you take them to the back, and that sort of thing. And they say, we'll pay you $27 an hour. And she has a job in an office, which you get to see that as well, like the interaction with the office. Her boss is not very nice. This woman that's her boss. They don't get along too well. And she works with a guy that's kind of an idiot, and she's getting tired of working there, and she's starting to think, I need to do something else, right? So she wants to take these guys up on the offer. She's thinking about doing it, even though it's a very shady thing, right? A very shady thing. And she talks to Sharona about it. And Sharona says, well, maybe they're into making, adult movies, she says, right? And she's like, oh, no, I hope not. I hope it's not some scam and just trying to get me into adult movies or something like that. And she says, oh, I bet you that's what it is. But she decides that, she has this magic 8-ball. She has a magic 8-ball. And she's had it since she was a little girl. And she'll ask it questions. So she says, should I take up the offer at the nightclub? And the ball says yes, So she decides to go for it, to go for this club to see what it is. I also want to say that this comic is not for kids. There is adult language in the comic. There's no nudity or anything like that, but there's adult language in the comic book. So that be warned, there's swearing, so it's not for kids. But it's a great adult comic book for adults. It's just the stories are fascinating. So, okay. So I was missing a bunch of issues of this comic, right? So I found out online that there's only 7 issues of this reboot. There's only 7 issues. That's it, right? So I didn't know how many there were, but I have issue 1 and 2. I've got issue 4. There's a really nice cover. And then I've got issue 7. Which turned out to be the last issue. Now, one time I went to the comic store downtown recently. I was looking through. I don't do this that often. I usually just look through the comics, like they call them the floppies or whatever, right? That's what I. There's a guy that has a blog online where he reviewed every comic book published by Eclipse and a few other companies. And he calls, or Fantagraphics was another one, and he calls the individual comic issues floppies, which I thought was that's pretty good, right? To differentiate them from trade paperbacks, because you know they're kind of floppy like that, right? And the trade paperbacks are not, obviously. So I usually don't look through the trade paperbacks. I just look for the floppy comics, you know, the individual comics, which I really like. But you know, I recently just, and it took me years to even think about this, because I never really gave trade paperbacks a thought, you know. But I thought maybe I should look through the trade paperback boxes, see if there's stuff there. And that's where I found this. I found this Private Beach trade paperback, and I was so excited about that. Because it turns out, like, and people know this if you buy trade paperbacks, but trade paperbacks are great for filling in missing issues that you don't have. So I was missing issues 3, 5, and 6 of Private Beach, so I'm missing a lot of the story, you know. Well, guess what? I come upon this trade paperback, and I didn't even know which issues it had. I just bought it because I knew I was missing some of the issues. And it turns out it collects issues 1 to 6 of the comic book. So if you can't find the individual issues, but you can find this, I highly recommend it. This is a beautiful book. Beautiful book. And you'll get the whole first 6 issues in this comic book. So because of this, because I found this trade paperback, I was able to read the complete story. At least up to what was published. So up to issue 6. Now after issue 6, there was one more issue, which was not collected, well, until later. I'll get to that. But issue 7. So I was really lucky to find issue 7 as well. And so I think I'll tell you a little bit more about the story before I kind of close off my comments about this comic book. There's a moment in the comic where Trudy is taking a sick day. She's leaving work early because she's not sick. She just, if she doesn't use up her sick days, she loses them, right? And there's a lot of jobs like that. So her boss doesn't like that. She's like, oh, it must be nice. You're going home early and everything. Your boss is not very nice, right? But she's going home, and she's riding the bus home, or the subway, and she sees this guy. Oh, what's his name? Guy Moody? I think his name is Guy Moody or something like that. And she doesn't recognize him at first, but he says, Trudy Honeyvan. He says, we were in school together, in high school together. We had a class together. And then she's like, oh. And there's this expressive faces again that come. I can just see it without even opening it. She's like, oh, yeah, I remember you now. So how's it going? And she starts talking to him. And it's this nice little conversation, this great little conversation. And then it's over. And then he leaves. Well, maybe I'll see you on the bus sometime, right? Or the subway. And you think, well, was that it? Was that the whole thing? Like, did that tie into the story somehow? And you don't know. You're not going to find out until maybe a few issues later or whatever. Of course, it turns out that it does tie into the story. But again, that's the great thing about the comic book. It's like real life adventures, but everything's connected in this narrative with a supernatural kind of element to it. So to tell you some more, she does go to the club. You know, I'm not going to give everything away, right? Okay, but because there's a lot more going on than what I'm telling you. There's like all these different subplots and things in the comic book, right? But she does go to the club, and she's taking people to the back room, and she doesn't know what they do in the back room, right? She has no idea. But when they come out, they seem all confident and not nervous anymore, you know. And she meets her boss there because her boss overhears her on the phone talking to Sharona about the club, and she kind of gives her a hard time and says, "Oh, you don't know what they do here, do you?" And she says, "No, I don't." She says, "Oh, you wouldn't know." And she's very sarcastic like that, you know, her boss. And yeah, I don't want to. I could tell you, I'm not going to give away though. I'm not going to give away, right? And actually, I'm not even sure completely because the story was unfinished. I mean, I know some of it, but the story's unfinished, and there's a lot of stuff going on here. There's also this thing where she keeps seeing this girl. She keeps seeing this girl around town who she said used to be her best friend when she was a little girl, but they lost touch with each other. And now she doesn't recognize her at all. She went up to her in a coffee shop, and they show this, and the girl's like, "Sorry, I don't know who you are. I don't know who you are." But then she sees her again after that and says, "Well, I saw you in a coffee shop. You remember that?" And she's like, "No, I don't remember that either." So it's like every time she forgets everything about seeing Trudy. So that's a weird little thing too. And Sharona works at a hospital, so you get to see adventures that she has at the hospital, things that happen there. Some of them tragic, and some of them, you know, humorous. There's even like a short piece in one of the back of the comics that's drawn like an Archie comic, which is a weird thing, of Sharona working in the hospital. So it looks like if Sharona and, you know, one of the patients was an Archie, were Archie characters. It's very weird. There's also a guy. There's a guy with a prosthetic leg who was in some sort of accident or something like that, who got a settlement. He's a friend of theirs, and they go to his house where he's playing video games with Junior, I think. And there's things going on there, and there's so many different things. It's like there's so much going on in this comic book. It's just a fascinating little universe. So I think I've probably told you enough about the story. I think you should track it down if you want to read, you know, more about, you know, are there aliens involved? Is it a supernatural thing, or is it just she imagining this stuff? You know, what happens with her and her friends? I think I already mentioned that this issue, the last issue, starts a story arc where she's going on a road trip. Where, okay, well, I'll tell you because I know I keep saying this, but I can't resist. Okay, so 65 GTO, right? A 1965 GTO. She's supposed to deliver it for this guy that delivers automobiles or things, right? And her and Sharona go on a road trip to deliver the automobile, and she meets this other character in a cafe or a diner, who's also like delivering things. She's got a Fabergé egg, and so there's something going on there too. Yeah, I'm not gonna give too much away, but yeah, it's a shame that the story wasn't completed, but it was completed because okay, so I've got every comic. I didn't even know I had the whole thing. I've got the whole thing except for one little thing. It turns out that in 2016, and this would have been 10 years after this comic, 20 years after the original comic, the story was finally concluded. And I only found this out online before I made this video. I didn't know this, you know. So there is a private beach collection that collects all 7 issues and has 30 new pages in which David Hahn completes the story. I don't have that, so that's the only thing I don't have. I didn't see that at my store. So I'm wondering how the story ends, you know, how it completes. Now, the only thing about that is, in an interview, he said that he was originally going to conclude the original story after 9 or 10 issues. So he had about 30 pages to do what he would have done in 8, 9, 10, like 3 more issues or so. So he had to conclude it. He had to rush it a little bit, the story. And also, it had been 10 years since he'd written the characters, so he couldn't connect with them the way he did when he was 10 years younger, he said. But he did his best to conclude the story. And from what I've heard, the ending that he gave it is open-ended, so that if he ever wants to go back to the comic, he could. He did say that he was approached by some TV studios, movie studios back when this was out, because it was popular with the critics, you know, with the indie crowd back in the early 2000s, this comic. He said that it would have made a good movie. It would make a great movie, this comic. So it's a shame that it isn't one. But anyway, I guess that's all about all I'll say, really. I mean, I've said a lot, but again, I would urge you to, if you want to get the original, if you want to get the original miniseries, you can get that, and it'll be a fun little read. I'm getting all mixed up here. It'll be a fun little read, but realize that it's not as good as the later reboot. That's the original. So, although I recommend the early one because it's a great read, I recommend this one, this Private Beach incarnation much more than the original miniseries, and I'm sure David Hahn would do the same from what I read in an interview. So, again, look for the trade paperbacks if you can, or look for the individual issues. And you're going to have an amazingly fun read. So that's all today for Tom's Comic Curios. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of Private Beach, and I'll see you next time.